I just want to kind of bring in those of you who maybe are new or haven't been in a couple weeks or a couple months. We've been in this series called THRIVAL. And we've been really asking this question: what would it look like to thrive in our lives, to experience a sense of ease and well-being? And as we've been moving throughout this series, we've been along the way adding little things to our THRIVAL toolkit, right? Things that can help us in our journey of thriving. You know, many of us have in our homes or in our cars like a survival kit, right? No? Yes? I hope so. Probably should. When I was a kid, we had a survival kit growing up, and we never used it. But I had this knowledge that there was food in it, but it was food that could survive any kind of emergency. And so I was very curious what this food tasted like. But of course, I had to save it for the emergency, and I never got to taste it. So I was just reminded of that today and thinking, what was that? What was it? You know, like the deeply stale, like infinity cracker or something. So you don't have a survival kit. That's okay. But I think what we really need is a THRIVAL kit. And throughout this series, we've been adding things onto it. And for example, a couple weeks ago, Arlene came up and she sat here and she shared with us something that was in her THRIVAL toolkit. And this was her journey and her experience with mindfulness-based stress reduction. And throughout the different topics that we've explored, I hope that you've found things that maybe in your life, as you're going throughout your day and experiencing the difficulties of being human, things that you've been able to apply. And so today, what I'm so honored to do is I would like to share something with you that I have recently added to my THRIVAL toolkit. And I think the beauty of what happens when we add these things is that we learn these different tools and tips and tricks and resources that help us support ourselves in the difficult moments of life. And when we can do that, I think we are freer and more enabled to connect not only with ourselves and our true nature, but to connect with others and ultimately to connect deeply with this experience of life. Maybe for you that language is God or the universe or source, that when we can get out of the way these difficulties, when we can face them with a sense of trust and well-being, that we can experience more fully this life. And so for me, that journey was with IFS, and more broadly, the term that I'll use is something called parts work. Okay, parts work is a fairly loose term that covers different forms of therapy and really an understanding of one's self as a collection of different parts, as Dr. Schwartz says, as maybe parts with different needs, different desires, maybe even a full range of personality, like he said. And if you're wondering, is that true? What does that look like in my life? I would just start by asking you this. Who of us has ever felt conflicted before? Right? For those of you who aren't raising your hands, I'm so envious. That sounds like such a wonderful existence. So nice. Think about it. When you are conflicted, you have multiple parts coming up with different needs and different wants in a particular situation, trying to navigate and negotiate what the way forward is. How many of us have had a conversation with ourselves? Right? How many of us maybe not only had a conversation with ourselves among just a few parts, but maybe many parts, many voices? How many of us have ever felt like in a season we disliked ourselves, or maybe in a moment we were angry at ourselves? I was thinking about this dynamic, and I was realizing, at least for me, it's interesting to try to zoom out and see how this plays out. You know, there's a part of me in a moment that is doing the disliking, right? And there's another part of me that's experiencing being disliked. It kind of sucks, you know? This part's like, I'm so sorry about him. It's embarrassing, I know. And then this part's like, why are you always picking on me, you know? Or how about when we make decisions, right? There's a part of you that's like, we deserve this flat screen TV. We worked really hard. There's another part of you that's like, no, you don't. You don't need all that, right? There's a movie that came out almost 10 years ago now called Inside Out. How many of you have seen Inside Out? Fantastic movie. And really, what it covers is this idea that within each self is a sort of a group of emotions that help navigate life by sort of being in conversation with one another. And of course, this is just a image and an illustration of how this might look, but I think there's so much truth to what was attempting to be captured in that movie, because we are full of these various driving forces within us. As psychologist and author Ralph de la Rosa, who has written extensively on IFS, as he says, we are not one-dimensional and our multiple dimensions are not static. Just as our bodies are made of many parts that form a dynamic interwoven system that works together, so it is with our psyches. We are more awake, alive, and complex than we know. When we go on these journeys of therapy, of spiritual growth, of trying to go deeper in oneself, what I've tended to notice is that it's not a journey of trying to add things, right? Trying to bring on achievements or climbing a ladder. It's actually a journey of bringing light and clarity to that which has always been there and always been true for ourselves. And so when we do this parts work, or we do this level of self-examination, we are shining a light on who we have always been. See, as we've talked about this idea of thriving, something that we've made pretty clear in our conversations is that thriving happens in the present. It's about self-love and self-acceptance in the present moment. Yet when we are purely living in a survival mode, we often withhold that sense of self-love and self-acceptance because in a way it makes us feel safer, right? Because in a weird, twisted way, when we tell ourselves we're not safe, we're actually doing it so we can be safe, right? Don't feel safe, always be vigilant so you can protect yourself. And yet thriving is really about giving ourselves the safety to love others and love ourselves. And we do it through this type of self-examination. So when I look at my life, I've noticed that there are cycles of what I would consider anxiety and depression at different stages in my life. In fact, I think of these two experiences as two sides of the same coin. They're very connected, at least in my own experience of it. These are also broad terms, and it can be really helpful to find more specific terms and an understanding when we're talking about our emotional experience. But for today's sake, I will just say that when I have an experience of anxiety, it's a voice that says, are we okay? Are we doing enough? Are we on the right path? And those voices get really loud inside. And then eventually, for me, what happens is I get tired of those voices. I get exhausted by them. And so what I consider depression comes in, and it just says, I'm so tired of trying to be perfect and trying to live up to the expectations of those voices. I'm just tired. So at the end of 2023, last year, I felt myself experiencing the telling signs of entering into that cycle. And for me, what I've noticed is that in those moments, I might begin to close off emotionally. I might begin to experience my thoughts racing, and then I'm trying to keep up with my own thoughts. And so in order to be able to do that, I probably need more caffeine. And then all that caffeine makes me, you know how it is, you're jittery and you're uncomfortable, and then you want to distract yourself from the uncomfortable feeling of being so amped up. And so then you have social media or TV or whatever to distract you. We all know we have our own version of this. It's a cycle, and it builds and it builds. And so for me, what I chose to do is to enter into a form of therapy that was a little different from the norm for me. Sometimes it's good to take a break from our routine. Our routine is a beautiful thing, but there are moments where you step out of it to gain some new perspective. This is why, you sign up for a retreat or something like that. It's a healthy thing that we can do, changing our routine to gain some new perspective. So what I chose to do is during this period, I decided to enter into a different form of therapy, and I specifically entered into internal family systems therapy with a new therapist. Now, again, I've hinted at internal family systems, but I want to give us a little bit of a deeper explanation of what it is. And so I have a video that is essentially a person explaining internal family system to kids. And if we can't understand something that's trying to be explained to kids, then we're probably not going to get it at all. So hopefully this is helpful.
This therapy all starts in our hearts. When we're born, our heart is calm and creative. It's curious about life and strong and confident and brave and courageous and loves everybody. The great thing about this is that our hearts stay this way forever, no matter what happens to us. As we begin to grow, we all have some tough and sometimes terrible things we go through. You may want to watch Terrible Things Some Kids Go Through video to find out more about what some of these things can be. Lots of times, these terrible things lead to parts of us that feel sad, scared, embarrassed, and sometimes even sick and disgusted. These terrible things, and the feelings they create, threaten our heart and all the great feelings that live there. To keep our hearts safe, we take these parts and lock them away and try to forget about them. These parts stay trapped in time, and they keep calling out for us to rescue them. The more tough things happen to us, the more trapped parts we have. This is too hard for our heart to handle, so we send these trapped parts even further away and put up walls to try to keep them out. We find or create other parts to protect us and guard the wall. Some of these parts can be pretty positive, like being a hard worker, or a great student, or really good at sports, or having something else we're good at we can focus on. Other times, these parts look pretty negative and can be the reason why people come to therapy in the first place. Sometimes, this looks like anxious parts, or sad parts, or angry parts, or parts that get us into trouble or make us hurt ourselves or others. In spite of the problems they create, these parts really believe they are protecting and helping us. All they care about is keeping us safe. Instead of getting rid of these parts, we need to get to know and understand how they're helping us. Then, we can see if there are different ways that they can help. They might even be willing to help us rescue our trapped parts instead of keeping us from remembering them. We also start paying attention to our heart and help it get stronger. When our heart is strong enough and our protective parts are ready, we begin taking rescue missions to release our trapped parts. As our trapped parts are rescued, guarding parts don't have to work as hard. They're more free to relax or find other ways to help us. And we are free to start living more from our heart again. Together, our job is to learn about our parts and how they protect us while helping our heart grow stronger. Then, we work with our protective parts to rescue our trapped parts so they can join our heart.
Every time I watch that video, I feel really amped up. I'm like, I'm ready to go on a rescue mission. Let's get the parts. I want to follow this up really quickly with a quote by IFS founder Richard Schwartz, a quote that just fleshes out some of these ideas a bit more. When you were young and experienced traumas or attachment injuries, you didn't have enough body or mind to protect yourself. Yourself, or what the video called your heart, couldn't protect your parts, so your parts lost trust in yourself as the inner leader. They may have even pushed yourself out of your body and took the hit themselves. They believed they had to take over and protect you and your other parts. But in trying to handle the emergency, they got stuck in that parentified place and carried intense burdens of responsibility and fear, like a parentified child in a family. Your protector's goals for your life revolve around keeping you away from all that pain, shame, and loneliness and fear. And they use a wide array of tools to meet those goals. Achievements, substances, food, entertainment, shopping, sex, obsession with your appearance, caretaking, meditation, money, and so on. Now, as I go through just a little bit of what my experience was in this work, I want to make it very clear, especially for those of you who have done some of this work or know a lot about it. I'm vastly oversimplifying a lot of this for today's purposes. I'm not a therapist, right? I'm not a psychologist. I just want to share an experience that I had and something that was helpful to me. Maybe it's a doorway for you, and I encourage you, please, if you are interested in this, I encourage you, read Dr. Schwartz books, there's podcasts, there's videos with a lot more information. But I just want to walk you through a little bit of what my personal experience was. What I learned is that what the video called your heart, or what Dr. Schwartz calls self, is also considered core self, that part of ourselves, right, that is full of love, full of curiosity and openness. How many of us have had experiences in our lives, even now, where we felt like we were in that deepest part of our heart? We were experiencing our deepest self, a self without judgment, without fear, just love, right? And yet, of course, what has developed and what we probably experience day to day are these different parts that show up. Anxiety, perhaps a sense of wanting to control, all of these in attempts to protect core self. Protecting core self through perfectionism or overthinking, or maybe even humor, maybe trying to over-spiritualize everything. You're probably thinking, this is a very specific list. Who is this? It's me. But something I want to remind you that these videos and quotes have reminded us is that these parts, they all formed out of an attempt to protect you. They formed because they love you. And as the motto, really one of the core mottos of IFS goes, there are no bad parts. They were there, they formed to keep you safe, right? The behavior that they may engage in, the ways in which they may be trying to keep you safe may be misguided and may be destructive, but the parts themselves formed out of a desire for safety and a desire for love, right? And yet what do? We look at the parts of ourselves that we don't like and we try to push them away, right? How many of us have realized that is kind of a hard thing to do? In fact, impossible. Like, how many of us have been able to successfully just eliminate all of our anxiety, or just eradicate all of our fear, all of our anger, we just expel it out, right? No. What we suppress, what we push down, it pushes back on us, right? But what if instead of looking at our parts as bad, using this motto, we begin to change our relationship to them? Because, friends, the alternative is not working. Like, how many of us have been in an anxious situation and you've thought, well, if I could just stuff all this anxiety in a Ziploc bag and throw it in my backpack, and I'll be good, right? This never works, right? Or you're angry and you're like, I don't want to be feeling this. I'm just going to toss it in the other room like a barking puppy or a crying child, and it'll stop at a certain point. No, what you resists you. Or, as the father of psychoanalytic theory, Sigmund Freud, says, unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. So internal family systems, or parts work, is actually about turning towards the unexpressed emotions, turning towards those exiled parts, becoming curious, having an attitude of nurture towards them rather than judgment. So maybe what now feels like a chaotic noise inside of you can turn into a symphony. So I began my work with this new therapist, and her invitation to me within each session was, be curious. Accept what comes up and be kind to it. For it might be that whatever's coming up is very afraid, has been in hiding for a very long time, so be gentle, right? There's another mentor of mine who says, what comes up comes out. What comes up comes out. What you encounter in these moments, don't try to press it down. Allow it to speak. Allow it to breathe. And yet, going into this, I really began to wonder, Do I actually want to know? Will I be challenged by what I find if I go through this process? But in going through this process, what I began to do is develop a little shorthand for myself of how I might engage this work, because, friends, it's something that really happens on a day-to-day basis. And it's really this journey of getting to know our parts. And you might wonder, how can we possibly do that? Like, what does it look like to actually get to know these parts? How many of us have ever been upset before? Okay, we're gonna have an easy time then. We're gonna be okay. Friends, we have daily opportunities to encounter our parts. Because I'd venture to say that none of us have ever gone a day without some kind of difficult moment, right? Or something we might consider a trigger. And yet, instead of seeing it as a crisis, we could change our perspective to see it as an opportunity. Author Gareth Gwynn says, our triggers become welcome signs that we have rejected something inside of us. So let's be curious, what is that? And how can we unreject it? How can we bring it into the light? So I just want to imagine for a second a scenario, and you might put your own version of this into practice. But imagine that you are running late, right, to a lunch with a friend. And if you're me, it's probably because you did the navigation wrong. Like, as we found out, I'm not very good at directions, and I read something wrong in the navigation or something. Okay, you're running late, and all of a sudden you start to notice yourself go into a panic. Maybe you go into a bit of a spiral. If I'm late to this lunch, this person's going to be upset with me, and they're going to tell all of our other friends that I'm a late person, and everyone's going to abandon me. My family's going to find out. My work's going to find out. They're probably going to fire me. I'm going to lose everything, and I'm going to die alone because I'm running late to this lunch, okay? I wish it weren't true that I've thought these things before, right? But what would it be like if in that moment we could just stop and just notice that experience, bring some awareness to what's happening, interrupt the spiral, and instead feel in your body what's going on. There's something happening here. Ask yourself, where is that feeling occurring? Is it something in my stomach? Is it something in my chest? Is it a sensation? Is it a tightness? Friends, our best ally in these moments is curiosity. Really one of our best allies in life. And yet I want to acknowledge that it's one of the hardest things that we could possibly do, to have a difficult and challenging experience, and at the same time to step out of it and observe it and give it some gentleness. This, I believe, is the same muscle that we are working out when we meditate. When we meditate, we are experiencing a thought, and yet we are working out that muscle to be able to remove ourselves and examine that thought and see it not as who we are, but just as a thought that's coming into awareness, and to allow it to move on. And I think that we do the same thing when we can have this awareness of our parts. We make this move from I'm anxious, or I'm mad, or I'm stressed, to there's a part in me that has a need right now. There's a part in me that's communicating something. So what we can do is we can ask some questions, and we can start by trying to give some language and naming that part. Maybe we say, who are you? What's your job, right? So I'm running late to this lunch, and I feel this tightness, and I feel this uncomfortability. Who are you? What is this part? Maybe we name that part perfectionism, right? I'm never late. I'm not a late person. We're always on time. That's perfectionism part, okay? And maybe that part is saying, well, if we're just perfect all the time, then we can control how everyone sees us. And then that will keep us safe. That will make life more predictable. You can do this with whatever is coming up in your life if you're willing to maybe ask a couple questions. Things like, what do you want, right? Because what you'll probably find is that that part is there to help you. It's trying to help. Maybe you don't like the way it's doing it, but it's trying to help you. Or maybe you could ask it, how long have you been doing your job? You might be surprised to find that it's been doing its job for a very, very long time. Maybe a more interesting one, what do you look like? If you could imagine that part, how is it presenting itself? Maybe, and this is an experience that I have, maybe it shows up as a very young version of you. And what you'll find is if these parts have been doing their job for a long time and they show up as this very young version of yourself, you can probably guess that it's been this way for a very long time, and it might be in some ways still existing in the pain that it experienced at that age. So we take this level of curiosity, and I wonder what it would be like if we had this type of curiosity to the people in our lives, right? Like, wouldn't the people in our lives benefit from this level of curiosity? They do the thing that triggers us, and instead of being upset, we can ask, what's going on inside of them? What are they trying to keep safe within themselves, right? We can really start to see that people aren't just trying to cause pain to one another, but we're really trying to feel safe and secure, and we go to these sometimes extreme lengths to do so. This made me think really about the golden rule, one of the most ubiquitous aspects of all spirituality, all morality that we see throughout religion, right? The golden rule, it shows up all over the place, and it's really based on this fundamental idea, right? You shall love your neighbor as yourself, really based on this core idea that what we really want is love. And there's a disconnect between how we can give that to others, but we all want love. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel secure. And this is the type of empathy that we can give to our parts. So then we can move into speaking to our parts, right? Because when you can understand a part and what it wants and how it works, you can give it some compassion. And maybe the first thing that you can do is give it some gratitude for all the good that it's done, right? Thank you, perfectionism, for all the times you actually help me stay on top of things. You help me stay organized. You help me achieve the things I wanted to achieve. Give it some gratitude. Maybe then assure it that you are listening, right? I hear you. You're raising some alarm bells, right? You're saying, hey, we're not a late person. What's going on here? Because our parts, they just want to be heard, right? And when you can give them that assurance, there's an immediate change. It's true of people, right? We all want to be seen, and we all want to be heard. And our parts want the same. And often the irony is that they develop because they weren't seen and they weren't heard, right? So lastly, what you can do is you can reassure the parts that you're in control, right? I did my best. Look, perfectionism, I'm doing my best. But honestly, it was just a tough day. It's okay. It's not every day. You're doing a great job, okay? And honestly, the person that we want to meet for lunch, they're going to be fine. They're going to understand. But thank you for sharing, okay? And we're good, okay? And I've noticed that for me, whenever I engage in that kind of work, whenever I engage in this inner dialogue, it begins to calm my nervous system. And it begins to actually not just do that, but also there's a sense of understanding within. There's a new piece of myself that is coming to the light, right? And so for me, I came out of therapy and now I talk to myself every day, which is interesting because some people go to therapy to stop talking to themselves. But that's what I need, okay? It's how I reassure myself and give myself that acceptance, body, mind, and soul. Dr. Schwartz says that the goal of IFS is not to eliminate parts, but to get them to work together in harmony. This leads to a greater sense of wholeness and integration. Friends, I encourage you as you journey through this life and as you attempt to integrate these tools of thriving, do what works for you. There is no tool that is one size fits all. But I hope today to introduce you to an idea that might be a doorway. It might be helpful. It might just remind you that there is a complex, beautiful, and mysterious world inside of you. And if we could have this approach that there are no bad parts, we might be able to bring some gentleness and curiosity and get to know them. So I know that in talking about all of these different aspects of self, maybe in this moment, maybe you're feeling some of these things come up. So what I want to do is I want to just stop for a moment, take a couple breaths together, maybe say a prayer that invites some of these parts, if you feel comfortable, invites them to just let you know what they might be feeling in this moment. So if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. We take a few deep breaths, expanding our lungs each time, also expanding our inner capacity, our sensation and awareness of self. We send some gratitude to all of our parts, the hard work that they've done to try to keep us safe. We thank them for that work. We let them know that we will begin to listen to them more, to pay more attention. And we let them know that, hey, the heart, the self, it's here now. It's here. And that hard work that you've been doing, you can relax, you can let go, and you can begin to enjoy this experience of life. We just get to feel what it feels like to pay attention to our inner world, knowing that this level of awareness and this tool is always with us and always available. And lastly, we send things out. We send it out to those of us in this room who are holding space right next to us, holding space for us to go deep. We send things out to the larger community of this planet, and to however you choose to name it, to Source, Creator, to God, for giving us this opportunity to go and see the infinity outside of ourselves and see the infinity within ourselves, to appreciate it and learn and to grow. Amen. Thank you all for joining us. I encourage you, if you'd like to pop right over to Z Pizza. Again, you're going to have to put that in your navigation for... don't be late or else the part's going to... OV. It's OV Pizza. I'm going to lay on the ground and do some parts here. You are all dismissed, and you'll see at OV Pizza. Thank you.